This is Stephen Sloan. The date is May the 18th, 2012. I'm with Mr. William Womack at his home, 2303 Cimarron, Midland, Texas. And this is the interview for the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission's Texas Liberators project. Thank you, Mr. Womack.
It's my pleasure.
I want to begin in Fort Worth.
Okay.
So I'd like to hear a little bit about, I know you're a bit of a historian, you've already told me that. I'd like to know a little bit about your family.
Okay. My father is from a little town in eastern Tennessee called Watertown, is where he was born. And my mother was from a little town in southern Kentucky called Glasgow. And my mother was married to my half-brother's dad for about a year, and he was killed in a railroad accident in Fort Worth. My dad happened to be on the engine, a steam locomotive, when he was killed, so they were good friends, and he knew Mother quite well. So when my brother was born about 3 or 4 months later, and my mother moved back to Kentucky, and my dad courted her through the mail and proposed through the mail. And they were married when my brother was about 7. And they moved back to Fort Worth, close to the railroad track where my dad worked. And my sister was born in 1919, and I was born in October 1921. We lived there for several years, then moved to the east part of Fort Worth, they call it Riverside. And every summer, my mother would go back to the Kentucky to the farm which she bought with her husband's insurance money. And so I kind of grew up in the city and on the farm too. In the city during the school year days or months, and then we'd go up there and spend a month or two every summer. Mm-hmm. So I grew up there in East Fort Worth, and and about 38, I was about 17, I imagine. Yeah, 17, and I joined there wasn't any jobs around for kids. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Texas National Guard just to get their $21 a month. And in 39, and well, actually in 1940, they started mobilizing the National Guard, and they were drafting 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So I was going to be 19 in October, so I'd be prime draft bait in about a year. So I'd already been in the Guard for about a year and a half, so I just went ahead and joined up with them, and we went to Camp Bowie, Texas, down at Brownwood. Stayed there about a year training, and we were supposed to get out in a year. And I was actually home waiting on a discharge on December the 7th, 1941. And of course, you know what happened then. So I just, I went back to the camp, and they said, no discharges, everybody's in for the duration. In 42, we got, the whole division got transferred to North Florida, and was taking amphibious training. And this unit I was in was the Texas National Guard 36th Infantry Division. After about a year there, we moved on maneuvers up in the pine lands of North Carolina, South Carolina, for several months. Then we moved on up to Cape Cod at a camp called Camp Edwards, which is and we were taking amphibious training out in Nantucket Bay. So that was in 1942. Well, in the spring, I think it was April or May of 43, we loaded on a ship, and the whole division went to North Africa. And that's where our combat, we were in combat reserve in Africa, but we went to Italy in a few months, and that's where my combat experience started.
All right, well, I want to go back and ask you a few questions about some things that you mentioned. When you joined the Guard in '37, what was that like? What sort of things were you doing in the Guard at that time?
The unit I joined was an artillery unit, and it was really easy. We just meet twice a month, and we'd go in there, and they'd show us how to bore sight the cannons and how to disassemble the breech blocks and such as that, just general maintenance, and how to transport the pieces around, and it's pretty essential. We didn't do any shooting or anything, but it was very simple, and about half my graduating class was there, so we had a good time.
Yeah.
And there was really not very military. There wasn't anybody around except people that we knew and had gone to school with.
Did your family do all right during the Depression?
Yeah, my dad was a locomotive fireman at the time, and he had a real good paying, steady job, and we didn't suffer any from the Depression. And my older brother, half-brother, graduated from high school and went to work in a Texaco station down the street. So everybody was making their way. And I had an older sister, and I think she worked a little at the library, and then I had a younger brother, but he just played. He didn't do anything.
So what, do you remember what your pay was in the Texas National Guard?
$21 a month.
$21 a month.
And that's
you were rich.
Yeah, I was rich. I had money to spend. Well, let's look at that this way. I could go to the movies. When I was a kid, my dad would give me 50 cents about every payday. I would go to the movies for 9 cents, and then I'd buy a sack of popcorn for a nickel. Then I'd go get a haircut for 35 cents, and I had money left.
Well, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that moment where you hear about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I know that made an impression on you.
Yes, it did. I really don't recall exactly what I was doing, but I was at home with my mom and getting ready to go look for another job, a job that I could, since I was going to be out of the Guard, I'd have more time. And so shortly after I heard that, well, we turned on the television. We didn't have a television. We turned on the radio, and they told all about it, and then they said all discharges are frozen at the moment. Well, I wasn't really happy about it, but I wasn't too discouraged either. I wanted to do my part, so I went in with enthusiasm and to learn the job and do whatever I needed to do. But I didn't really know what I was getting into.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody did. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I don't think any of you or your buddies knew what you were getting into. Yeah. Well, take me from that moment forward. I know you talked about waiting on the discharge, and you're transferred to North Florida, and you're doing amphibious maneuvers there. What sort of training were you doing, and can you talk about that training and what you were doing there?
Oh, in Florida? Well, we were traveling, actually we were mostly moving the guns around. We'd go into an area and set up our pieces and get ready to fire, but we didn't have any ammunition, and we weren't on the firing range, so we just set them up and wait a little while and take them down and move to a location, a new location. This was all done in darkness, because we never moved during the day. So, and then that was a practice we followed in combat too, and I can understand why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was in the swamps down there, and we'd, of course, we were learning how to get trucks out of being stuck, and howitzers that were swallowed in the mud holes, and because it wasn't all on the pavement, it was cross country.
And the maneuvers up in North Carolina and South Carolina?
Well, we were simulating combat with several more divisions, and in fact it was an army type. There was I don't know, probably 3 or 4 divisions, and we were doing make-believe combat with those divisions, and just about the same thing we did in Florida, and moving around at night, and what we call dry firing. You'd put a dummy shell in the cannon, pull the trigger. Of course, nothing happened, and we'd take it out and move a little ways, then stick it back in and shoot again. So it was just practice shooting those cannons.
Mm-hmm. Can we stop? Well, I'd like to go back. We were visiting off the recording about some of your interests when you were younger. If you'd like to talk about some of those.
Well, yes. While I was in the National Guard, I had an opportunity to take some correspondence courses through the mail, and I chose radio and telephone, and they were just a regular correspondence course. They had to send questions. They sent me a book, and I read the book. Then they would send questions, and I'd answer them, and it was interesting. I learned a lot about telephones, how they were constructed, and how they transmitted sound, and same with radios. And when I was actually, I didn't tell anybody I knew all that when I was in the National Guard. That wasn't really important to me. But when we got up to Massachusetts, they began to, I can see where I would be of use with that, because we had a lot of communication problems. Telephone wire was a big problem. Picking it up and laying it down and moving it from here to there. And then we started getting radios, and I said, well, I know how to operate a radio. And they said, oh, you do? From what? I said, I told them I had a course. So the captain said, well, we'll just use you. And I didn't know exactly what they had in mind, but when we were in combat, I was actually many times up on the front lines with the infantry with the radio and an observer. I was not qualified to really observe artillery fire because I'd never been to an artillery school except at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then they didn't let me direct fire or anything. I just up there, but I did learn how to orient the battery on a magnetic azimuth and such as that, and so I could get the battery ready to fire if the lieutenant got shot or something happened to him. And so that's where some of my pre-studies did affect my service as a combat soldier.
You also were a musician.
I'm sorry?
You were also a musician, right, when you were younger? Played the bugle?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I played in the high school band, but unfortunately I was so lousy. I didn't pass the course, so I just played one semester, and I really didn't like it. It was no fun to play in a band. But I did know the scales, and so I was a bugler for a little while, and till another guy come in that played the bugle better, so I gave it to him and let him do it. But I guess I could still play a little bit.
Well, let's go back ahead. You took me to we went through maneuvers in the Pinelands area, and then what were you doing at Camp Edwards once you transferred to Cape Cod?
We were doing amphibious training. We'd go out in these little landing craft out in the Nantucket Bay and come back in and attack one of these little islands around Martha's Vineyard. We attacked Martha's Vineyard 5 or 6 times. Never did conquer it. But it was real interesting. I liked Massachusetts really well, except for the winters were very cold. And I've never been subjected to such intense cold as they encountered there. Mm. But still, it wasn't as bad as Germany in 1944. Yeah. Because we did have heated barracks, and we didn't over in Germany.
Yeah. Well, did you, was the I know you were following somewhat what was going on with the war during that period.
We were aware that we were going overseas when they started what they call surveying equipment. Like if you had a pair of leggings, that's where leggings, we had a canvas leggings that we wore at that time. And if they were worn, they'd take them up and issue a new one. Same way with a belt or a pack, or if it's your rifle wasn't up to date, they'd take it up, and they issued new helmets. In fact, I still got my old helmet up in the attic. When we first went in, they issued World War I helmets, those soup bowl type things. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a year or two later that we got in the new ones, and they were no fun to wear. But when they started surveying equipment, we knew right then that we were headed for overseas, and then in less than 2 months we were in North Africa. And that wasn't bad over there. The combat, we landed at a little place called Mirs El Kabir, which wasn't very far from Oran. And we stayed there at Mostagim, I think, for about a month, and we moved to the West Coast, to Casablanca area. Mm-hmm. And we practiced our surveying. That's where I learned to run a survey instrument and how to play the battery, we called it. And we were in combat reserve because the Africa Corps was just about defeated at that time. Mm-hmm. And our whole division caught one German in about a 4-month period. But and then let's see, I think we got up there in April, and then in August the same year we went to made the Salerno Invasion in Italy.
How was the passage over for you on the Atlantic?
Oh, not well. The sea was rough. We had a lot of northwesterly winds. And about 4 days out, the ship we were on quit. The engine stopped, and the convoy left us. And we were sitting out there by ourselves, and they told us to take our boots off and get ready to inflate our life belts. And we had one destroyer that was circling us, and every now and then we could hear a depth charge go off. So we knew that we were going to get torpedoed by a German submarine just any time. But about 8 or 10 hours later, well, the mechanics finally got the engine running again, and we finally caught the convoy about daylight. Of course, they were doing about 10 knots, and we were doing 18, so we were full speed.
Yeah.
What a rough ride, too.
I imagine those are some tense moments where you're staring dead in the water.
A lot of times in that rough sea, the screw would come out of the water and the whole ship would vibrate. So then it would start digging in the waves again, and then away we'd go. Mm. But we finally caught up and arrived to our destination safely. Mm-hmm. Of course, there was a lot of us sick on board.
Did you get sick?
Sir?
Did you get sick?
No, I didn't.
So you could have been a Navy man.
I didn't like the ships. They were too confining. You could just walk about 50 feet from side to side, and then you have to turn around and walk somewhere else. So I wouldn't have made a sailor very well, I don't think.
Well, I'd like for you to tell me your first impressions when you got to Mil El Kabir. Just take me through that. What were your impressions?
Okay. Well, we went through the Straits of Gibraltar about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were lit up like New York City. You could see every ship in the convoy reflected from that light. And so about daylight, we got to our designation, which was a little small port. We were the only ship there, debarking. And I was standing on the fantail looking down, and I was amazed how clear and green the water was. You could see the prop on the tugboats churning the water as they pushed us into the wharf. And so before we got off the ship, they handed us all a bandolier of ammunition. First time we'd ever had that many cartridges with us. So we knew right then that we were in trouble and were expected to use that stuff.
Did you have any encounters with any of the locals there?
The locals stayed their distance. We didn't see a few of them on shipboard acting as sort of roustabouts and shipboard laborers, and most of them just wore a breechcloth and a raghead. In fact, that's what we called them, ragheads. Mm-hmm. But they were, I didn't see many of them, but a few weeks later we got passage, and we went into Algiers, and we could see a lot of Muslims, and I guess they were Muslims, native people in their dress. We were kind of awed, you know, and they looked at us, we looked at them. We couldn't converse, so we just passed by. It was an experience, and then
it's a long way from Fort Worth.
Long way from Cowtown.
So, and then you said you got to go to Casablanca as well, right?
No, we never did.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
We could see it. It was close enough, but they didn't give us any leave. We were at the nearest town of any size was Casablanca, but there was a small town nearby called Port Laudi, but it was sort of inland. It wasn't really on the sea, and we'd go down on our time off, we'd go down to the sea, and a lot of times we had a supply of hand grenades that the Navy had salvaged out of a ship that was sunk during the invasion of North Africa. Mm-hmm. And we'd take those hand grenades down and throw them, pull a pin and throw them in the river, in the ocean, and they'd go off, and a whole bunch of fish would come up, and the native boys would swim out to get the fish. So we had plenty of fish to eat.
And time on your hands, it sounds like a little bit, yeah.
We did. There wasn't much to do. My section was called the survey section, and we mapped all the, well, it was a big live cork oak forest there. The oak trees looked a lot like they did here, but the bark on them would be 4 or 5 inches thick, and they'd peel that off, and it was used for cork insulation. And so we'd map those trees and plotted them on a piece of paper. That was just to keep us busy.
Now, I know you're also preparing for the Italian campaign while you're there.
We knew that we kind of expected when they invaded Sicily to go in as going on that, but we never did. And so they were priming us for the Salerno Invasion, and we were part of the 5th Army at that time, and it was made up of the 45th Division from Oklahoma and the 3rd Division, and I've forgotten where they were from, up north somewhere. And of course there was a lot of support, Navy support people involved in that too. Mm-hmm. But we got bombed several times, but we had no casualties. We had good air cover, and they kept the German Air Force at such a high altitude they couldn't do much. But we did, on D-Day, we did lose. Our first casualty was a casualty from strafing. He was one of my best friends too. He was a Golden Glover, and we used to box. I used to box with him all the time, and he got killed in an air raid. Mm. So from then on, it was sort of it was no fun anymore. Fun and games ended.
Yeah, you knew at that point that
yeah,
you were in war. Yeah.
And but we stayed in Italy about almost about a year, I guess. And then we went to the Anzio Beachhead after that. And then after the Anzio Beachhead, we moved as far north as a little Italian town called Sielaff, which is a small town on the west coast of Italy, on the Aegean Sea. And we pulled out there and went back to Naples area, into a town called Pozzuoli. And we boarded LSTs and went to southern France. And in southern France, of all things, I'd read about this before. We landed at the town of Frejus, F-R-E-J-U-S, I think it is. And it was a town that Napoleon returned to after his exile in Corsica. And I thought that was really neat. But we didn't have a very big battle there.
There wasn't a lot of resistance?
No, not a lot of resistance. The Germans made a token resistance and hightailed it out of there. Because the army from Normandy was getting starting to move at that time too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they had pressure on the other, on the northern front there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real funny. The day we took Rome, well, it was about the 6th of June, and I think it was the same day that they made the Normandy invasions. And the papers didn't even say anything about Rome, but that was fun. That was like going to a big parade.
Well, I'd like to hear more before we get to southern France, some of your memories from the operations in Italy.
Okay. Some of the scariest moments is with artillery, we couldn't bypass roads very easily, and the Germans had made a practice of blowing down trees across the roads. I mean, dozens of big trees, 3 or 4 feet in diameter. Well, when we'd try to drag those out of the way, they had them booby trapped. So it was a fun game trying to get in there and help them get those trees out where we could get through. A lot of times they just we didn't have chainsaws at those days, and they'd cut the top of them out and then tie a tank on to them and drag them out of the way. And then we'd try to get through there that way, but that was a big problem. And then we didn't get very much counter battery fire except when we got up into the Leary River Valley, and then we were hit pretty hard at times. Around the Monte Cassino Abbey. I remember when they bombed that thing. And I was laying on my back in my foxhole, and I looked up, and here come all these airplanes. Bomb bay doors open. I said, "Oh my, we're going to get it now." But they didn't drop a bomb till they just got past us, and then they bombed the Abbey pretty well. Mm-hmm. But it didn't do any good. We didn't make any more progress after that.
Yeah.
Just tore up everything.
Yeah.
And funny thing about it, my neighbor across the street was one of the guys that loaded bombs in those airplanes. He was in Italy too at the same time. But they were down in the southern end of the country, at Barry. And I was over there talking to him, and he told me that he was loaded bombs for that bomb run. I said, "You SOB, you like to kill me." He said, "Too bad."
Well, as a forward observer, are you with an artillery unit?
Yes,
okay.
I was with the Battery B, 155th Field Artillery, 36th Infantry Division. I was cross-trained in everything. I could not only go up and run the radios at the forward observer post. I was a good gunner. I could lay the battery. I could sight the gun, and I could ram the shells in, and I could fire the piece. There wasn't anything about that I couldn't do, and I'd already been in the Army 3 or 4 years, and doing that same job back in the States, so it was nothing new, except we get counter battery fire a lot. And I didn't like going up on the forward observer too much, because after you got up there it wasn't too bad, but a lot of times you'd run across enemy patrols at night, and that's when we moved. And the first time I went up, I was carrying a box of rations under one arm and a Tommy gun under the other. And I don't know, if we'd run into a bunch of Germans, I'd have probably dropped both of them and run because I couldn't fire either. I might have thrown the rations at them, but that would have been no good really as far as protection. But they insisted. So you have to do what they tell you to.
Well, what was your impression of the artillery units that you worked with?
Our artillery was devastating. That's what the Germans, captured Germans, said. Because we had a process that they developed at Fort Sill, a system, and they called it the Fire Direction Center. And every artillery piece that was in the area was tied into that. And so when you got ready to fire, if you had a real, I mean, if we had a bad attack or something, we had a system called time on target. That's where every gun within range would fire at a certain time. And we had them coordinated so that the time of flight from the muzzle of that gun would be the same with the gun behind us or a gun in front of us, so that it all hit at the same time, and it's called time on target. And the people that coordinated that were behind the lines in what we call our fire direction center, and it was very effective. Because we'd have, make an attack, you might have 100 or 200 artillery shells landing in that same general area at one time. And we also had a fuse, what we called a posit fuse that we'd use. It was radio controlled, and it would send out a little impulse, and when it got so close to the ground, it would ignite the powder charge in the shell, and it would explode 30 or 40 feet off the ground, and that was devastating. The worst thing we had was to contend with the German artillery firing on us, but we had also were close enough that we'd get mortar fire. In the Leary River Valley at Monte Cassino, we were only 3,500 yards from our target zone. And I would get behind the artillery piece with binoculars, and I could follow the flight of that shell till it hit the side of the monastery. And that's way too close.
Yeah. How is your hearing as good as it is?
What? I get a disability payment from the Veterans Administration now for hearing loss.
Yeah, I would imagine. That did a lot of damage to your ears, all the artillery that you were around. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it went on for, I think we were in combat, our division was in combat for 360 days, actual combat. But artillery unit was in much longer than that because we'd support other units. And we belonged to what we call the Corps Artillery. Corps Artillery is an artillery battery that's not attached to any division. We were attached to the 36th Division, but they'd use us to support other divisions. So we were in combat a lot longer than just 360 days.
All right, well, you had taken me to the invasion of southern France. So you're into southern France now, and you've established that position there. Can you take me forward from there?
Yes. We were in the 7th Army, which is made up of the 36th Division and the 63rd and the 45th, I believe, and probably the 3rd Divisions and other supporting units. We went up the Rhone River Valley. The Rhone River runs north and south just west of Switzerland, and it's the main river drainage for that part of France. And the Germans were set up for defensive positions along that. They were in the defensive all the way. And we'd take one little town after the other, and then and get ready for a counterattack. And sometimes the counterattack drove us off. We'd have to go back and do it again. But counterattack is what we were really prepared for. We could kill a bunch of people doing that, and
because you could establish their position.
You what?
Talk about that. Why counterattack?
Well,
Yeah.
the Germans would they liked to counterattack before you could really organize your defense, and they've had counterattacks prepared in case they lost an area, that they could send those other troops in, counterattack troops, and retake that area. That was the thing, and we were prepared for that. So we knew that they were going to have counterattacks. That was just the name of the game, and that's the way everybody worked. We didn't. Well, we a lot of times we'd fire a heavy barrage, and we immediately moved through our impact area, and you could see the damage we did. The houses would be all torn up, and there'd be dead soldiers all over the streets. None of them with bullet holes, but there'd be one buildings knocked down, and a lot of them crashed into the debris, and so we were effective in really destroying emplacements like that. And we didn't have any real devastating battles, and our casualty rate was very low. The most casualties we had at one time was, I think, three men killed and 7 or 8 wounded. I remember the worst casualty I've encountered was there in Italy. We were in a position, and there was a creek behind us, a little circular creek, and we were in a direct observation of that Monte Cassino Abbey. Well, we were in that position probably 28 or 30 days for when we got, all we got was a small arms fire, I mean mortar fire in our position, but one day they decided they'd really give us a working over, and they did. And I was in the dugout up above in front of the battery. The battery was firing over me. And so we started getting the fire. Well, we shut down, everybody went in their holes. And I was listening over radio, and number 1 gun hollered, help, help, we got casualties on number 1. And so I said, stand by, I'll call the medics. And I called the medics on another phone. In just a minute, well, an ambulance went right by the place where we were and down to the gun position. But the shelling continued. And then I got another phone call, and this guy said, God damn, both their medics are down. And I said, oh, well, I'll be down there. So I threw the phone down and took off, jumped out of my hole and run down there, and shells were still coming in, and they come in, and there was a big bank to my left, sort of a erosional feature, and it fell into the creek. And when I was running down parallel to that bank, and the shells were hitting up in that bank, and every time I'd hear one coming in, I'd hit the ground and double up, and I lost my helmet, so I didn't pick it up. I didn't go back and pick it up. I finally got down there and to where the ambulance was, and it was shot all to pieces. And the 2 medics, they said, one of them was hit in the back and he couldn't move. He was a captain, and he was laying down close to that bank and one of the wheels on the ambulance. And the driver was laying under the ambulance. And I looked around and there was 3 or 4 bodies laying in the creek, floating in the creek. So I waded out about waist deep and got one and drug him back and turned him over, and he started talking, you know, and so I went back and got another one and turned him over, and he started moving, you know, and I knew his. And then this last one I got, he just kind of moved a little bit, and in the meantime, one other guy from the other gun came over and helped me. So there was 2 of us out there in that creek, and we got all those guys out. 2 of them were dead. And this one guy that was a friend of mine, he was from Fredericksburg, Texas, a German boy. And so he was hit right in here and right in here real bad. This up here was really gushing blood, so I pulled his shirt off and put a bandage around and tied it real tight around his shoulder and around his neck. And he hadn't moved. I knew he wasn't dead because I could feel his heartbeat. And so I was cutting his pants off with my pocket knife so I could get to this wound down there. It was bleeding pretty bad. And my knife was kind of dull, and I was jabbing and pulling and jabbing and pulling. And all of a sudden he opened his eyes and spit out a bunch of water. He said, "God damn it, Womack, watch that fucking knife." I said, "Shut up." And I just kept working. And I got him all bandaged up. And then by that time, the shelling had stopped. And another guy came over from number 2 gun, and we got loaded them in. There was 6 of them in that ambulance. And we left the 2 dead ones laying there. And I got in the ambulance, and one of the shells had hit up on that bank, and a big fragment of shell had went right through the right window, through the instrument panel, right in front of the window steering wheel. Oh, I said, this thing will never start. But I turned on the switch and hit the starter, cranked right up. And I drove out to the Highway 6 and turned left and saw a little sign on the road that said aid station, point with an arrow. And I went down there and drove in there, and the captain come out, and somebody come out and said, "I'll take those 2 right there." And I said, "What about the other 4? He said, "I don't have any more room for them, so take them down to the other ambulance, the other field hospital." And I said, "Where's that?" And he said, about 2 miles down the road. So I took them down there, and I unloaded them, and all those guys survived. And I was sitting in there, and I said, I was waxed, muddy, dirty, and no hat. Well, I did have my hat. I picked it up on the way by. And I said, "Have you got a cup of coffee?" And they gave me a cup of coffee, and I sat there drinking this coffee, and I looked up, and then in walked my best buddy. He had a big old bandage around his arm, and I said, "God, what happened to you?" He said, "Oh, I was lighting a fire to make some coffee, and it caught my shirt on fire." That was Cliff Puckett. So that was one of the hazardous experiences I had.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Yes.
But, after the war was over, I went by and visited my friend down in Fredericksburg, and he was in the car business, and I bought a car from him.
I hope he gave you a good deal.
Oh, he did, and his wife and daughter thought I hung the moon.
Well, they should. They should.
But he died several years ago. In fact, there's only one of us left, and I showed you his picture.
Yeah. Well, there's another story that I know you've told I want to ask you about, and that's the 2 clerks at Anzio.
The what?
The 2 clerks that came by your post. That story of the 2 clerks that came by the post that missed the Battle of Anzio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's more of a lighthearted story than the one
Yeah,
you just told. Yeah.
They were catching up. They had been bypassed. Pridemore and Puckett's who it was. And so what happened was, I didn't know this story till years later. And they said that they were on their way up there, and they went through this little village, and the traffic was real bad, and they were riding in a sort of an open pickup in the back seat, in the trunk bed of it. And they were sitting there, and the traffic was all stopped, and there's a couple of good-looking girls come walking by. And neither one of them were Italian. They were just old Texas boys, but they had enough lingo about them to figure out that these girls were going to a party, and they invited them to go with them. They said, well, hell yes, let's go. So they bounded out of the back of that truck and followed these girls. They went around through a bunch of little old narrow streets and up some stairs and around that way. And finally they got to this building, and one of them said, reckon we ought to go in here. And about that time a bullet ricocheted off the top of that, right over their heads. So they just went in and they jerked their pistols out, and one of them said, hey Cliff, have you got any bullets in your gun? He said, yeah. He said, no, I don't have any. Give me some. They were well prepared soldiers. So one of them was a battery clerk. He never was exposed to fire at all. So they went on up to the party, and everybody was getting included up there. And pretty soon, the Puckett was, they got separated, and one guy heard all this commotion, and this other fella his buddy was being patted on the back, and the ladies are rushing up, kissing him. And so he went over and said, what the hell is going on? He said, well, you know Carla there, that was one of the girls they picked up on the way. She said she'd go to bed with me if I'd take her to America. So he said, well, what'd you say? And he said, well, I said, hell yes, let's go. So this party went on, and nobody ever left, and they were getting stoned drunk in there. So they said, they got together and said, we better get the hell out of here and get back to the battery. Well, they finally found their way back to the road where they left, but there was no trucks there. They were all gone. So they sat down and waited for another convoy, and finally they found, well, it was the next evening they found us. They got back to the battery where they were supposed to be. And we were sitting there eating the supper, and they come walking in. And I said, hey, hi guys. And I didn't know all this had taken that place. I said, where you been? He said, oh, we've been down the way. And so I guess it was probably 20 years later that I found that, heard that story. But they got away with it.
Well, are there any other stories from that time in Italy? I know there's a lot, but are there others that stand out to you?
Yeah, I have my friend who I talk to all the time was telling me the last time we got together about let's see, I guess that was up in northern part of Italy somewhere. We took over a run of Germans out of a position, and a gun position, and we took it over. It was just perfect for us. So we set our gun up, and there was a dugout. They had a sort of dugout, sort of cave, and then they sandbagged the front of it. So he said they had a new guy. We had a replacement come in for somebody that got wounded. And so after that night, well, they had to put a tarp over that thing, and the two of them decided they'd sleep in there. Well, old Vince was my buddy, and he said we got in there and we both went to sleep, and then I felt something on my leg. And I poked this guy and I said, keep your hands to yourself. He said, what the hell are you talking about? So pretty soon he felt it again, and he said he had a flashlight and he turned it on. There was a big rat on his leg. Said the rat ran in there and crawled out and crawled in between the sandbags. So he pulled out his .45 and at about a range of about a foot, blasted that rat. And he said the sand just covered him up in there. It was terrible. And he said the next day that rat smelled so bad they had to get out. But that was an interesting story.
Well, let's go back to you're kind of moving village by village in southern France, and because of the excellence of the artillery, you're not meeting a lot of strong. You're having a lot of success in kind of paving the way as you move forward.
At that time, we had brought our battery up to strength pretty well, and I didn't have to work on the guns, and I was available for observation, and so there wasn't much going on. We'd go up there and watch for the Germans. We were at a little place called Bergheim, and it was on a little hillock out in the Alsace plain, and you could see the Rhine River just past it. And we could see the enemy gun positions, and when they fired, we'd fire back at them. So we were having artillery duels daily, and we were using up artillery shells by the truckload. So everybody that had a driver's license for a truck got drafted into hauling ammunition, and I would have to get in that bunch. And we'd go back to the little place in an ammo dump in France called a little place near a town called Nancy. Well, Nancy was about 25 or 30 miles away, and it was a 16-hour round trip in a GI truck because the roads were clogged with traffic, and it was dark, and you had to drive slow. Well, I come back one morning with a load of ammunition it was pre-dawn, and the battery was firing at that time. And this fella, well, let's see, I'm getting ahead of my story. Anyway, I went back to we were billeted in the houses, and I went back to the house I was billeted in, and I'd been up all night driving that truck, and I was going to sleep. And I just got my boots off and crawled in that sack, and I heard these shells coming in. They make a peculiar sound, you can tell. And there was 4 explosions right out beside the house. And a minute later I heard somebody holler, "Medic, medic, number 3, I think it was." And one of my friends, whom I had known for years, was on that gun. So I ran out, got my shoes on and ran out there, and there was some bodies laying out there, and there was a shell hole still smoking. And I found 3 guys that were, 2 or 3 that were already dead, and one of them was alive. And the medic wasn't even there, and I tried to stop the bleeding as much as I could, and we rolled him on. Finally, they came with a litter, put him on, then I saw my other one. He was kind of, had blown him up against a wall. And this particular guy was named R.B. Bryant. And he had married a girl that was in my graduating class from high school. And I knew him really well, and I knew her really well. And when we were in Massachusetts, well, his wife came up to see us, to see him. She didn't want to see me especially. But anyway, they invited me to dinner. And I went to dinner with them, and then they got a big kick out of me. I put on one of the ladies' aprons and washed dishes. So this guy was laying up there, and his arm was gone from right there out, and I put my belt on his shoulder, what was left of his arm, and finally got that stopped. But he had several more wounds in his back, and pretty soon the blood was everywhere, and he said, "I don't want to die here," and in just a second he was dead. And that was one of the things that kind of haunted me. Years later, I was in college, and I was writing a geologic report for one of my classes, and I was staying with my dad's. I was living with my dad, and I was in the front bedroom, and it was cold in there. We didn't have any central heat or anything. And so I finished my report and went to bed about 1 o'clock, and I slept for about a few hours, and I woke up and I was just soaking wet. And I had this dream. I was laying on my back, flat on my back, and I couldn't get up for some reason. And I looked up, and there was this shadow of a man standing over me. And he said, "Here, Bill, take my hand." And I reached up, and he offered me this half an arm. And then I woke up, and this cold sweat. And that went on for periodically for several years until Charlie and I had kids. And finally, I wrote a story about it, and I finally quit.
Yeah.
And that was the worst thing I've ever had, is that particular dream about that guy.
Yeah.
But I wasn't subject to any small arms fire, but artillery fire is bad enough. But I made it without a scratch. I guess thank goodness.
Somebody's looking out for you. So, were y'all able to reach the German positions from where you were?
I'm sorry?
From that artillery, were you able to reach the German positions from where you were?
We could,
yeah.
But they were like us. They had to move them around, and we had an elevation advantage, but they had spies in that little town that was sort of a little German town, really. They spoke German and French in this particular town, and they knew everybody in there, and they knew everything we did. So we were glad to get away from that position.
Yeah.
And really, we didn't have too much more trouble till, I can't think we really, well, except when we started capturing those concentration camps. The only one I went to was Landsberg, and I didn't know about that till they come up. The captain come down and said, "I want you to take three men from this gun section and get on this truck and go up to follow this other truck." And I said, "Okay, well, what are we going to do?" And he said, "There's something up there you need to see." And so that's when we saw the Landsberg, and it was kind of a pretty location, really. There was a big row of dense pine, fir trees, and a lot of them scattered around. And when we got there, all the prisoners were on the inside, and we went inside, and then the prisoners started kind of drifting out, and then we saw all these dead folks, and then we decided we had to get out of there. And the poor inmates were just they were in a sort of a daze. They didn't act like they knew what they were doing. They were just milling around from one place to the other, in between the trucks. and they'd get in the trucks and out of the trucks, and some of them were just boys, you know, like teenagers. Some of them were old men, but they all walked with sort of a stiff-legged gait, and they were nothing but bones. They just had a little skin, and so they'd come up and they'd say, "Food, food," and of course when we first started that, well, we had rations in the truck and food scattered around there, you know, like soldiers do. They'd get so much every day and they wouldn't eat it all, so we started giving them stuff. And the next day we found out that we made a big mistake doing that, because our rations were so concentrated that it killed some of them. I don't know why. They'd been on a diet of water and turnips for years, and they couldn't handle any high protein food. And I later wrote a story about it. We really didn't have any action there, but to flower up my story, I made a little action out of it. And then we came back, or we went back to our battery, and then we saw a lot of them. We passed crowds of them on the highways, walking one way or the other. Sometimes they'd be walking back towards us, sometimes they'd be walking forward. And we didn't enter. I didn't go in anymore. I know we captured some more, and they asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, no way. And when the war ended, we were in Austria, and our unit captured Hermann Göring, of all people. He was trying to get away to Austria, to Switzerland, and a lot of the concentration camp people were in pretty good shape, and they put us to work hauling those refugees from the concentration camps to Switzerland. And we'd go up to, I think we were at Geneva, and we'd go up to the border and stop. We wouldn't go into Switzerland. We'd stop right outside the line, which was a sort of a fence, and we'd unload and walk across the border, and then we'd get in our trucks and go get some more.
Did you have occasion to have much interaction? We talked about you sharing food with them, but did you have any other interaction with any of the?
Yes, especially when we started hauling refugees back. In fact, I even have a picture with a couple of refugee girls that looked like in pretty good shape, and most of them spoke. I think most of them we picked up were French, French and Italians, mostly French, and they'd tell us what they had to eat, which was nothing, and about the life. You know, they're just treated like animals. And I even had one of them gave me a pistol, and he said, "I can't take this into Switzerland." I said, "Here, you take it." And I said, "Where'd you get it?" He said, I stole it from a German." Okay. And I think my son has the pistol now. And all those, I sent home gobs of souvenirs, knives, bullets, and helmets, and pistols. And I gave them all away to somebody that wanted them, so I didn't want them anymore. It just brought back bad memories for me. Yeah. The only thing I got is a couple of helmets in the attic, and I don't know where they are. If you want a helmet, you can go get it.
Well, can you describe the camp itself at Landsberg, what you remember? You said there about the grove of trees, but
okay.
What did the camp look like?
The fence looked like it was prefabricated. The posts were they had a looked like about a 4x4, and it's sticking up this way, and then a 2x4 out this way with another post, and then a 2x4 on the ground, so that they were self-sustaining. You didn't have to dig a hole, put them in, but they were supported by barbed wire. They had a mesh wire on this side, but heavy barbed wire on the top. And they were just out on sort of a flat plain. Looked like they had cleared the trees off, because the trees were in a perfect line. Looked like they just took a bulldozer and went down that and cleared all the trees off. And there were a few trees around the front, but the gates were made out of wood and wire. They were real flimsy, but they had the guard towers, probably 14, 15 feet high. Those the fences were about, I'd say probably 8 feet, 8 or 9 feet, about like these walls here. And but the guard towers was about twice that high. And some of them were had insulators on them, were electrified. But these on Landsberg that I saw weren't. They were just tacked on there with a staple, looked like that's using around the barnyard. And the barbed wire was very definitely, it had spikes on it that long. And these houses, barracks, I guess, some of them were sort of buried. One of them we saw, but most of them were just sitting out there plain. I didn't go in. I wasn't about to go in any of those things, but it had windows down there and just ordinary long buildings, and they were about 10 or 12 feet apart. And I don't know about where I imagine they had separate latrines somewhere, bathrooms, but I didn't look around that closely. I saw all those dead bodies, and I wanted to get out of there.
You didn't spend a lot of time in the...
No.
Why was it, do you think, that they wanted y'all to see the camp?
They wanted us to see the atrocities that were committed. And most of the bodies were just bones and skin. They were starved to death. I think well, you get a cold and it'd kill you up there. But that was just one of the things they wanted us to see about why we were there, why we were fighting. And it was something I haven't forgotten easily. Yeah. I'd like to forget it.
Did it change at all your thoughts about why you were fighting?
It did. I told at that time I felt like we ought to keep on shooting them. Because there was no justice. And when I read about the gas chambers, that was pretty bad too. But I didn't see any of those. Looked like these prisoners were, well, there was a couple of boxcars full of bodies on a siding right outside of the camp. They opened these gates, and they had access to the boxcars in. But I guess the inmates loaded the dead in those things, and they transported them up to Dachau, which is where the crematoriums were.
Well, it sounds like it hadn't been liberated very long when y'all went in.
When I got there, just had got there.
Yeah.
Somebody had got there.
Yeah.
The doors, gates, looked like they had ran through them with a tank or something, because they were just splintered. And the inmates were just wandering out. They'd try to talk to you, and most of them didn't speak English that I could understand. And of course, we weren't prepared to feed any of them or do anything with them except look at them. And we stayed up there about an hour, probably, maybe 2 hours. And everybody got back in the truck without being told to.
Well, I want to take you back a little bit. I left you on the wrong side of the Rhine. So when did y'all break through and get an opportunity to cross the Rhine?
Scott, I don't remember. Steve, I don't remember exactly the dates, but we left. There was no bridges down in that area where we were. And we went north up the river to Mannheim, and there was a bridge. And we crossed the river at Mannheim into the little town of forgotten the name of that town. The main town was Frankfurt. We went south, turned due south from that point. All the 7th Army turned out. We were sort of in the middle. The west flank went through, went to Munich and turned south, and we went to the little town of Ulm, U-L-M, and then sort of turned south there. And of course, with a big long line, because we knew that the Germans would be trying to get into Austria, and I'm sure there was a army on our left somewhere. On our right was the Rhine River, so they weren't going to go back that way. But we caught thousands. I've got pictures of them. We set up POW camps. One time, I think the day the war was over, they assigned a lot of us to guard a certain area, and they took me and one of my old high school mates, a fellow named John Rothrock. Was from my hometown, and in fact he went to school with me. And we were out on this road, just an empty highway, like there was no houses around, just trees, kind of like being, well, it was kind of land, really, like not like going from here to Andrews, anyway, but we were just standing out there on the highway, and all of a sudden we heard all this noise, and we looked around, and here come a whole company of German soldiers in column of about 10 abreast, 10 or 15 abreast. And this guy out in front of them leading them. When they were stamping that ground, boy, they were marching in precision. Well, they got up there pretty close. And we had our big old heavy-duty carbines, and we put them down there and said, "Halt!" And they all stopped. And we went over there and said, I went over and poked him in the gun, that captain, in the belly with my gun, and I took his pistol. I said, "Come this way." I said, let's see, did I say? I said, "Rouse!" And I pointed this way. And we all started marching again. We marched up to the POW enclosure with 2 GIs out in front and about 100 Germans behind us. But that's the most I ever was participated in capturing. And I think I gave the gun away. Somebody wanted it, and I said, "Here, take it." I already had one. In fact, I had a lot of guns. In fact, I had home guns and helmets and junk.
You liberated these things.
Yeah. I liberated these things.
Yeah. Well, I know when you crossed the Rhine, you knew the tide was turning when you started taking on all this.
Yeah. Well, we really knew that when we got into Alsace.
Yeah.
Because they were the Patton of the Third Army had wiped out the 2 German armies up there at Falaise Gap, and they just was almost unopposed. from there to the Rhine River. And after we got across the Rhine, we didn't have hardly any opposition at all. Of course, the Russians were on the outskirts of Berlin at that time too.
So where were you when Germany surrendered?
I was at Bernheim, Austria. That was a nice, quiet little town. And order came down and says, hold your position, don't fire unless fired upon. And we didn't know what it was. And then a little later they said, the war's ended. Boy, everybody sat down and said, man, I'm so glad there wasn't any cheering or firing in the air or nothing. Everybody just sat down and relaxed.
Yeah. Well, how many points did you have at that point?
I had 103 points. And that was enough to get me an airplane ride back to the States.
Because I know there was a divide at that point between those who didn't have, because the war with Japan was still going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them didn't have enough points, and they had to stay over there in the occupation army for a while.
So when were you able to get home?
Well, I was at. We pulled back from Austria and into Germany at a little town called Memmingen, and I caught a truck from Memmingen to Metz, France, which is just across the Rhine River. At Metz, I got on they had a train. Boy, that thing was rough. Square wheel train, I felt like. And anyway, we rode it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days from clear across France to Marseille. And then at Marseille, we stayed there and played volleyball for 3 or 4 days. And then they called out my name. And me and 24 more guys got on a couple of trucks and went to an airfield. And there was a bunch of old, worn out B-17 bombers. And they'd taken the bomb bays out of those things and put in wooden seats along each side. And boy, I was really skeptical about that, and I was even more so when they issued me a parachute. And the parachute they gave me must have been worn by a midget, because I couldn't straighten up. So I spent the entire trip from Marseille to Casablanca adjusting that parachute harness. And I got it there with, they said, well, take off your parachute. And boy, I was so glad to get out of that thing. And we stayed at Marseille, Casablanca for 4 or 5 days. And then we caught a C-54. And it was plush compared to what we'd been riding in. And all you could take along was your little, what we called a ditty bag, with a few toothbrushes and stuff in it. And we flew from Casablanca to the Azores, which is a little group of islands off the coast of Portugal. And we gassed up, fueled up there, then flew on to Bermuda, and we stopped again. That was a British island just off the coast of Florida, a ways. And then we flew from there on into Miami Airport. That was a real thrill. I mean, you see guys got down and patted the floor, the ground. I was one of them. And we went to the airport, and they had this row after rows of Coke machines on each side. All you had to do is push the button and the Coke popped out. And they had good Red Cross girls giving you candy and Cokes and whatever you wanted. And then we got I got on a troop train, and we went north up to about Jacksonville, Florida. And then the train stopped there, and we got off that train and got on one that was headed west, and this one we were on went on up north towards Pennsylvania and those states up there. This one went west, and we got off at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. Stayed there several days and got a discharge. And they gave you, let's see, your discharge pay, some of your discharge pay, $50 I think, and then $25 for bus fare. And so I got my discharge, and the guy that was typing up the discharge said, "Would you like to re-enlist?" And I said, "Would you like a fat lip?" And he didn't pay any attention, he just kept typing. So I caught a bus home, and I got home about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I caught a cab in town. And my mother heard the cab stop out there. She knew I was coming in. And, well, everybody got up, and we had big time. I'd been gone for years, but we finally made it back. And then that was in August of '45, and September the 1st, well, school started, and I went over to TCU and signed up for the GI Bill and spent the next 4 years in college. Then I got out, and I went to Texas and went to graduate school down there and got out in '50. First place I come was Midland.
You were a geologist, right?
Yeah.
That's what your degree was in. Yeah. So what did you do your undergrad in at TCU?
Well, I was the geology.
Geology
Yeah.
at TCU.
And I just went on down to the university working on a master's degree.
Okay.
And I took all the courses that I didn't have, that TCU didn't offer.
I see.
And then I didn't have any trouble going to work. Like I worked ever since, just about.
So what was your first job out here in Midland?
I went to work for Core Laboratories as a core analysis down here across the street. Well, you're not familiar with that part of town, but it was right here in town.
Okay.
And I stayed here about a year, and then we went to Abilene, and guess who I met in Abilene?
Somebody in the room who's been very quiet. Yeah.
Somebody in the room. And that was almost 60 years ago. And we've celebrated our 60th anniversary this fall.
You should be sainted. I'm not looking at you, just so the camera knows. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. And so I know, so how many kids?
We have 2.
2 kids. You have a son and a daughter.
A son and daughter. And the son is, how old is Ray? About 55? 55? Graduated from, let's see, he went to Tech, didn't he? And Midland College and Odessa College, and our daughter was in Tech and got an MRS degree before she finished.
Yeah.
But she finally wised up, and then she had 3 kids, and she moved back here about, what, 10 years ago? And she's been here ever since. She worked at the hospital. Okay. She got her degree in nursing.
But now you weren't in Midland for very long that first.
About a year.
Okay, all right. And then you moved. Now when did you go? Where'd you go from there? I know y'all met. And then,
well, we stayed in Midland, Abilene.
Yeah.
10 years.
Okay.
And then we got transferred to Midland again.
Okay.
That was in '61, and we stayed here, what, 4 years, and got we transferred to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and stayed up there a couple of years. Then over to Oklahoma City and stayed there 4 years. And then I left that company and got a job back here in '71, wasn't it? And we've been here ever since.
So has your work's been in around the oil business?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, doing core sample analysis.
I worked for oil companies for a long time. The last 10 or 12 years I worked for myself.
Okay.
Best boss I've ever had.
Yeah. So you saw a lot of changes in the oil business.
I certainly have, yeah. But now I'm glad I'm out of it.
Well, now I want to make sure, are there anything I should have asked you about that I didn't ask you about? Before we wrap this up here, there's some stories that you want to make sure we get in that we didn't touch on. Sometimes when you start to talk about these things, that you begin to remember them.
I remember one position we were in. I was in Italy. We were on Highway 6, which was the main highway that goes up the Leary River Valley from I guess northeast. And we were on each side of that thing, and the Jerry's had us pinned down, and I crawled into I was in the exec section, you know, and I was helping with the fire control. And I had a lieutenant with me, and he is a shave tail, and he'd just been there for a short time. That's a shave tail. He didn't know much what was going on. And so before the shells started hitting right and left, and we were down in a bar ditch, and fortunately it was a culvert under that road, and it's about a 48-inch thing. You could stoop and walk through there, but it was half full of gravel and rocks and snakes and scorpions and one thing and another. And this lieutenant crawled in there with me, and we took the telephones in there so we could stay with the battery, and we tell everybody to take cover. And so the shells just kept hitting, and we were in there all day, 6 or 8 hours. Every time we'd start out, they would open up again. Every time they'd see any movement, they'd start shooting again. But we had to stay till dark when we got out. And that guy could bazooki. He went nuts. And he was throwing his helmet out the door and throwing rocks and cussing and chewing out people that wasn't even in there. Just me and he were in there. He and I were in there. So they sent him to the rear, and I never saw him again. But what crowned him off was we had a medic attached to us, and this medic had dug him a slit trench, and it wasn't quite deep enough. And he was laying in that, had been laying in that slit trench 4 or 5 hours, and he raised his knee up, raised his leg up to kind of flex it. Shrapnel come along and shot his kneecap off. That really did the lieutenant in. He really went ape after that. But this old medic, he was an Indian from up in these Chippewa Indians, what he was. Had a big old round head. He drank a glass full of wine and he'd go plumb crazy. He's a nut. Anyway, he had a lot of people like that, but he bandaged up his knee himself. He had his stuff there, and I never did see him anymore. But that was a kind of a wild experience with that goofy lieutenant.
There's nothing you could do to get him in line, I guess, either.
Well, he just, I Some guys went that way when they got under shell fire. They lose it. The only thing I ever wanted to do is clean out my foxhole a little deeper. But I never stuck my head out as long as it was halfway hidden. I've got a book in there I want you to take with you.
Okay.
It'll tell you some of those stories in there.
Well, I know you learned how to dig a hole when you were in Europe.
I'm sorry?
You learned how to dig a hole.
Oh, yeah. I could do that real fast.
Well, anything else?
No, I guess that's about it. I never was, I liked what I did in the Army. I could do anything anyway, and the people the captain that was in charge of it knew I could, and he would let me. So if I didn't want to do something else, I would say, well, Captain, I would think I could do better with so-and-so and so-and-so. And he said, okay, Bill, go do it. And so I was in like Flynn most of the time because I'd been there so long. And consequently, I didn't get really easy jobs, but I got jobs that I knew I could do well. Actually, I was on an FO party when they made the trip to Anzio. And I knew they didn't need any FO people, so I talked to the captain. The captain said, so-and-so on that #1 gun is kind of green, so I'd sure like to take his job. You can put him up here on the bank somewhere or do something else with him. He said, okay. So I went down and told the gun sergeant, said, I'm the new gunner on this, well, on this thing. Of course, I knew him real well. So he said, okay, you know what to do. And so I went to Anzio as a gunner. And I got there, and as soon as they needed the FO man again, well, I said, I'm gone. So, and I could drive a truck as good as any of them. And we got these two little track-driven movers. I could drive one of those, but not very well. Mm-hmm. And when I'd put in the clutch, it would go whoop and throw everybody out just about. But I got along well in the Army, and I didn't have any problems with anybody, really.
What do you think you took from your military experience as far as into your professional career?
I believe probably tolerance of individuals and sympathy for the downtrodden, and that's just a plain old Christian attitude, like I learned in Sunday school. The guy my sister married, I met him in our Sunday school class in Fort Worth, and back in the 30s. He just died, what, 2 years ago? Last year, year before last. Last year. And that was sort of his attitude too. And I always like everybody until they, just about everybody until they, you know, some give me a reason not to like them. Mm-hmm. So, let me tell you a story. Here a while back, I was down at the barber shop, and I went in there, and both barbers were sitting in their chairs, and one barber was busy, and I went in there and sat down. He cut my hair, you know, and there wasn't half a dozen words spoken in there, and one guy was mumbling and kind of cussing to himself. So when I got through, well, I paid the barber, went over and got my hat and jacket. And in the meantime, there's a fella come over and sat down in the barber chair, and I'd seen him before somewhere. So I zipped up my jacket, and I walked over, and I kind of leaned over, and I said, "Say, partner," I said, "I know you from somewhere." He looked at me and said, well, I don't think I ever saw you before. And I said, well, Bill Womack is my name. And he said, told me what his was, I've forgotten. And I said, mine, that's a familiar name. And you look familiar. I said, now one time there was a guy in the cell next to me that looked exactly like you. He said, his eyes got real big. He said, oh, I never been in jail before. I said, well, neither am I, but you still look like the guy. And boy, the barber shop just went zoom. Everybody started laughing and talking, and they were still doing that when I left. So if you need a good opening for a stranger, try that.
All right, I'll try that.
He might hit you in the jaw, but your size, I doubt it.
Well, that's a good story to end on. That reveals a bit of your personality there. So, Mr. Womack, we want to thank you for sitting down with us today. Robert and I both want to thank you for your service to our country and taking the time today to share your stories to make sure they're recorded.
Well, that's fine. I enjoyed meeting both of you.